It was mid-March. A young couple sitting together on their couch, laptop in hand, were attempting to draft an email they never wanted to send. The subject? A vague, "Our wedding." In the days leading up to this task, they had run through every possibility. Do we completely postpone for a year? Maybe wait until we can have the wedding we dreamed of? Maybe we should have a small ceremony outdoors with whoever can safely get there and attend. Do we begin our marriage via Zoom? They decide to delay the decision at this moment, and instead they type the words, "We have made the difficult yet necessary decision to postpone our wedding. We will update you as soon as we have a new date and we know how we will celebrate." As the months pass, it becomes clear they will not be married this year, not in the synagogue they booked, on the same bima on which the bride had become bat mitzvah and was confirmed. They also will not be married surrounded by their loved ones this year, generations of their families, the friends who have become family. There will be no cocktail hour where they steal a quiet moment after the ceremony to kiss and, most importantly, to eat before the celebration. There will be no crowded dance floor, no never-ending hora. Over the past 6 months, we have all been in the process of receiving an education we never asked for, one on how to live through a pandemic. During a time of tremendous loss, whether it be loss of community, a loss of connection, loss of stability, either financial or emotional or both, and of course, loss of life, we have had to make decisions on how to move forward in marking life's most sacred moments. Even when it feels like life has stopped, life must go on. We have had to navigate how to unite two souls in marriage, how to welcome a new baby into the covenant of the Jewish people, how to celebrate our young people becoming bar and bat mitzvah, how to recognize another year of life for our birthdays and anniversaries, how to celebrate retirements or new jobs, all in the context of a pandemic. We are constantly balancing a tremendous sense of loss and a tremendous need for joy. There's nothing like reading Torah during a pandemic to remind you of how truly relevant its words remain in the modern era. When lockdown began in March, we were near the end of the book of Exodus, the eternal story of slavery, of seeking redemption and achieving freedom too long denied. In April, we read in Leviticus about plagues and illnesses that infect an individual and or a community. In June, we read about rebellions and community unrest. And that brings us to this week, in which we are told how to proceed into unknown territory. Deuteronomy 30 states, "Re'ei natati lefanecha hayom et ha'chaim ve'et hatov ve'et hamavet ve'et hara." See, the Torah says, "I set before you this day life and prosperity, death and adversity. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life so that you may live." These are among some of Moses' last words to the Israelites before they embark on yet another unimaginable journey, that of making a home in the Promised Land. Moses' message isn't so much a message as it is presenting a choice. How do you choose to live? Rabbi Elliot Kukla teaches that when Torah states that God puts life and death before us, our tradition is not telling us to decide whether to live or die, but instead that every choice that we make, from birth to death, matters. These choices, he says, range from how we treat our loved ones, to how we spend money, from whom we bring into our worldview, to how we choose our food. As we head into the High Holy Days amidst a pandemic, this message is as relevant as ever. Yes, choosing life right now does have an added layer of literal survival. Yes, choosing life right now does mean wearing a mask, continuing to social distance and wash our hands frequently. As medieval commentator Gersonides points out, one who lacks basic needs cannot concentrate on life of the mind and spirit. But choosing life is about much more than just our physical health. Gersonides continues, life in this verse from Torah refers to spiritual life. When it says choose life, it's saying choose your spiritual life. In Judaism, choosing life means choosing wholeness. Wholeness within ourselves, within our relationships, within our community, and within our world. It is possible to be physically healthy and to be spiritually dead, to have made the choice for spiritual death. We know what physical death looks like, but a death of spirit, it's possible to succumb to it without even realizing. Gersonides warns us and urges us that it's our spiritual well-being that we must nurture. To be a Jew is to be able to simultaneously hold two truths. One can experience a moment of joy during a period of grief. One can celebrate a wedding during a pandemic. One can have suffered but have also benefited from privilege. One can be good and make a bad choice. One can have sinned and still achieve forgiveness. That spiritual work, choosing that spiritual life, means addressing the pieces of our souls that need repairing and the relationships that need repairing. We do not have the luxury of neatly placing each individual moment of our lives into a box marked blessing or a box marked curse. We live much more complicated, beautiful, multifaceted lives than that. In just a few short weeks, we will read from the book of Ecclesiastes on Sukkot, words that are very familiar to you. A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for being born and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting the planted, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, and on and on. While we could understand these verses as explaining that there is a time and a place for everything, that there is a time to plant and a time to uproot, that there is a time to be born and a time to die, that there is a time to slay and a time to heal, modern Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai challenges this idea. In a poem called A Man in His Life, he says, "A man doesn't have time in his life to have time for everything. He doesn't have seasons enough to have a season for every purpose." Ecclesiastes was wrong about that. He continues, "A man needs to love and to hate at the same moment, to laugh and to cry with the same eyes, with the same hands to throw stones and to gather them, to make love in war and war in love." We are learning to live in the present in ways we've never been challenged to do in our entire lives up until now. We are being forced to accept and embrace the messiness inherent in life as more questions and answers arise about what our future will look like. We must hear the message of this Torah portion that no matter how much loss and grief we endure, we must continue to live and to choose life. These weeks between now and the end of the High Holy Days, as we roll our sacred scroll from Deuteronomy, where we now are in the Torah, back to Genesis, back to the beginning, where we'll again find new connections and renewed meaning in our ancient text, we must remember this message from Deuteronomy's closing chapters. Choose life. As the wedding couple I opened my remarks about tonight, they did end up having their ceremony. They may end up having a larger one later, but we must hold that sense of loss and acknowledge that for what could have been, and yet mark our sacred moments, bring love into the world despite all the pain. Choosing life means choosing love in all its forms, and that takes work of the Spirit. Today is September 11th, and following the attacks of September 11th in 2001, Rabbi Menachem Creditor was preparing to welcome his daughter to the Jewish people. Another moment where there was such devastation in the world, and yet a moment of joy that was about to happen. He felt moved to write a song to mark this moment, acknowledging both the world we currently lived in at the time and a commitment to building a better future. He picked the words from Psalm 89, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, which acknowledge that God builds this world from love. We are all living through a time of great fear and unimaginable hatred. When he looked at his infant daughter at the time in 2001, he wanted the world she would inherit to look different, to be infused with love on every level. But as the lyrics acknowledge, we have to build that world. And how? By choosing life, by finding ways to hold both grief and joy, by being careful with our words, by making teshuvah in the days ahead, by being there for our people, by staying spiritually alive, by being pursuers of justice and pursuers of peace. And if we build this world with love, God willing, literally, God will do the same. So as I close, please reflect on the question, how will you choose life this year? How will you build a world from love?